Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Mr. Commissioner.
Could we just make sure that cell phones and two-way radios are switched off, please? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. We're ready to proceed. My next witness is Mr. Yandu Ntuhene. He can take the oath. Mr. Stand up.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Commissioner.
Can you just give us your full names, please?
Luyanda Lekhabapudi Ntuane.
I didn't get the second one. Luyanda
Lekhabapudi.
Letlaba.
Pudi.
No, I can't hear.
P-U-D-I.
P-U-D-I.
Yes.
How are you?
I'm okay, thank you.
You well?
I'm okay, thank you.
Good. I hope you don't have any objections to taking the prescribed oath?
No objections?
Yes. Do you swear that the evidence you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth? Raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Mr. Ntuane, you have prepared a written statement for the benefit of the Commission. Can I please ask you to start your evidence on page 1, paragraph 1?
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. By way of introduction, I'm an adult male. I was employed by the PIC from December 2012 and left the employ of the PIC in May 2016. My initial appointment was in the role of Chief Technology Officer, which was a new role within the PIC. And after the restructuring during the 2015 calendar year, my title was changed to Executive Head, Information Technology. I have, to a limited extent, been following the statements that have been made in the Commission, largely through the media coverage. And it is part of the reason why I've agreed to come and give my version of events and experiences at the PIC. By way of introduction, I'd like to submit information on my educational background and professional background and take you through a summary of my experiences during my tenure at the PIC and put on record the circumstances under which I left the PIC. And I've submitted as well documents to support the circumstances. From an educational perspective, I completed
Sorry, can I just interrupt you?
Yes.
And I'm sorry to do that. I just wanted some clarity, and obviously it is something perhaps evidence leader you can look at. Among our documents is your mutual separation agreement. And one of the clauses in it is confidentiality. How does that impact on you presenting it and dealing with it at this hearing? I mean, I don't want there to be jeopardy that we have for you in any form. It's Annexure E.
Mr. Commissioner, perhaps I can deal with that. I considered it. Clause 9 reads that it is a material term of this agreement that the parties maintain the confidentiality of the contents of this agreement, as well as the circumstances leading up to this agreement. The parties undertake not to disclose the terms of this agreement to any third party in the absence of the written permission of the other party, save where such disclosure is required to enforce the provisions of this agreement, or to any person who is required in law to know the contents of such agreement or in any dispute concerning this agreement or its conclusion. Now, in terms of the terms of reference of this commission is in law entitled to inquire into these separation agreements. So the confidentiality clause is not applicable to this commission, in my respectful submission.
It might be so for the commission, but and when I say the commission, I mean the three of us and you as the legal team. But what about the public?
Mr. Commissioner, in terms of the proclamation, the hearings must be in public. And it's public knowledge that the other witnesses coming to testify later also had this confidentiality agreement. It's all over the press, and it's been reported in this commission what the amount involved in the separation agreement was. So, in my respectful submission, the confidentiality clause is out of the window.
Yes, in terms of contracts, generally they say that if a court of law would want some contents, you know, they can get them. So a commission is like a court of law, so these documents should be public.
I have no objection, Mr. Commissioner, if you want to initially make a ruling, pending further argument, that this must be treated as a document confidential to the Commission and not to be put out in the public or to the media.
Well, has the statement not been disseminated now, by now?
Not yet to the media.
Mr. Ntwane, may I ask you whether you are comfortable with its disclosure?
Mr. Commissioner, I'm not in a position to say, to comment on the legalities and the ramifications thereof. I think mine was to come and dispel certain rumors or misstatements that may be associated with my name. And in doing so, the only method that these rumors can be dealt with is to actually engage with the documents and the evidence I submitted.
Can I make a suggestion? Because I think that the confidentiality, the separation agreement, which is a document in and of itself, would not impact, I mean, it obviously adds information to ourselves, but it would not impact on your testimony in terms of your statement. And I would suggest that until we get further clarity and allow us to discuss it ourselves in distributing the documentation, for the moment we do not distribute that section E, because that would allow you to not have disclosed that content to the public but to us in keeping with this, and it would allow us to look at that a little further and perhaps afford you some protection in that regard. I don't think that it affects, so from my reading of your statement, I don't think it affects the content of anything else.
Through you, Mr. Commissioner, that's absolutely correct.
Yeah, can I for that purpose make a ruling that when the statement is made available to the public, that annexure must be removed for now?
We will see to that. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Yeah, it's becoming a bit more complicated now. The witness has just pointed to me that in 9.3.9 he deals with the content of the separation agreement.
No, but I think the question there doesn't reveal any figures, it reveals the terms.
Absolutely.
And I think you're making a different point in that as to how it led up to that.
It's
so
fine.
I think that personally I would agree with the judge's ruling that we leave out the annexure, but it does not affect 939.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Then we can proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. By way of my educational background, I completed my Bachelor of Commerce degree at the University of Natal, now referred to as UKZN, in 1997 with majors in Business Information Systems and Economics. Over the years, I've obtained a certificate in Applied Project Management in an IT environment from the University of South Africa. I've obtained an Advanced Diploma in Project Management from the Cranefield College of Project Management. I've completed a postgraduate diploma in management, specializing in distributed commercial information systems from the University of Cape Town. I've completed a professional certificate in Chief Information Officer practice from Wits University. I've also completed Fundamentals of Cybersecurity certificate with the University of Cape Town through their Get Smarter program. In addition to the above, I also hold a number of IT industry-specific certification, notably being certified in Risk and Information Systems Control through ISACA, certified in Governance of Enterprise IT through ISACA as well, and certified in Information Security Management through ISACA. I also hold a COBIT 5 ITIL and PRINCE certificate at a foundation level. My professional career started in 1997 after I completed my studies and I started as a...
Can you please explain who's ISACA and who's APMG?
Thanks, Commissioner. ISACA is an internationally accredited organization that develops standards around IT auditing, risk management, security management, and governance. They are based in, or headquartered in the USA. APMG is also a certification body in the IT industry. They are based in the UK, I believe. I started my career as a systems developer or programmer with Unilever in 1997. After a number of years there, I moved on to the financial services sector, or joined the financial services sector, largely in the roles of IT project and program management. So in essence, driving IT transformation and change initiatives on behalf of major institutions or big institutions such as Standard Bank, Old Mutual, the South African Reserve Bank, and also the Department of Rural Development and Land Reform. My first engagement as an executive or as an IT executive was with Itala Development Finance Corporation in 2009, after which I moved on to running or being a GM of IT operations at MWeb ISP, which is an internet service provider. At the time it was a multi-choice company, and my major task there was to look after close on to 12,000 businesses that were hosted in that environment and a 300,000 subscriber base. In December 2012, I was appointed to a newly created position of Chief Technology Officer at the PIC. At the time, I joined an ExCo team that initially had 5 members, but I was the 6th member, and those members included a CEO.
Sorry to interrupt, can you just put a name to everybody there, please?
Thanks, Commissioner. The CEO, Chief Executive Officer at the time was Mr. Elias Masilela. The Chief Investment Officer was Dr. Daniel Majila. The Chief Risk Officer was Dr. Zulu Kaba. The Chief Financial Officer was Ms. Matsepo More. The Chief Operations Officer was Mrs. Petro Decker. In my first 18 months at the PIC, I was focused on driving the perception of IT as a struggling business unit, and I was regarded as a high performer, and this culminated in both the CEO and members of the board stating this fact openly. I managed to systematically clear audit findings that had characterized the IT organization in prior years, and delivered a number of IT solutions to deal with identified problems within the business.
Just to put it in perspective, you told me that you entered in a quite low level, entry level with regard to salary. And after you have clearly demonstrated to PIC your abilities, what happened with your salary?
Thanks, Mr. Commissioner. At the time I entered, there was already a process underway for regrading and restructuring the organization. I think that was one of the many processes that would happen over the years. Because I had joined the organization in December 2012, I did not qualify for any increase during the calendar year of 2013. The unintended consequence of that, by the time we hit the 2014 financial year end, there was a huge disparity between my salary and the rest of the executives. But in recognition of the work I had produced and other, I think, considerations the leadership had shown to my team, I was then afforded a salary increase, which I will approximate at about 40%, which put me on par with the rest of the executive team, and also included my performance related increase.
Thank you. You can proceed.
At the time, the EXCO team was fairly balanced and focused, although quite notably, there was a notable frictions, notable tensions between the CEO and the CIO at the time. And ultimately, the CEO took a decision to leave the organization on the back of these unresolved tensions.
If you can describe the tensions between the CEO and the CIO at the time, what would you say in one word?
I would say they were around power. If there's one word that can be used that will cover the description of the tensions, it was power. Mr. Masilela left the PIC in 2014. Later on in the year, around July 2014, July or August 2014, I stand to be corrected on the dates, the Chief Risk Officer, Dr. Zulu Klaba, also left the organization. I am not privy to say exactly what drove Dr. Zulu to leave the organization. However, I do know that he was unhappy with the result of a rating that the risk unit was given after consultation with the Audit and Risk Committee meeting, Audit and Risk Committee and the CFO and the CIO at the time.
Can you just, for the benefit of this commission, describe Dr. Kaba? Is he well qualified, underqualified? What type of person was he?
I think Dr. Klaba is, highly qualified. He's got a PhD also in mathematics. He's well learned. He's a patient man, and he believes in doing the right things. He places ethics above all else.
Thank you.
In December 2014, Dr. Machila was appointed as the new CEO. Excuse me, if I could just go back one slightly. After Mr. Masilela's departure, Ms. Matsepa More was then appointed as the acting CEO. In December 2014, Dr. Machila was appointed as the new CEO, and thereafter there was a swift process of reorganizing the organization. And during this restructuring, my title was changed to Executive Head of IT, with no changes in responsibilities, but quite notably a change in reporting line. So my reporting line changed from the CEO to report into the CFO.
Can I just again interrupt you, and I apologize for doing so. In terms of the new structure, there were a lot of new people appointed as executive heads. My understanding is at the time, all of them, with the exception only you, were acting appointments, but you were the only one who was then appointed as the executive head IT.
Thanks, Mr. Commissioner. I think for clarity, there were two members of EXCO who were not executive directors at that time, and that was Mrs. Petro Decker and myself. So the permanent appointment that took place immediately was Mrs. Petro Decker in the role of executive head of corporate services, and myself as executive head of information technology.
The position Mrs. Decker previously occupied, that of Chief Operating Officer, was now not, that position has been removed from the organogram.
That's correct. I think it's also worth noting that when Dr. Majila convened a staff meeting to announce these new appointments or confirmations of our roles, it was received quite warmly by the staff, to an extent that they actually applauded the announcements, which was quite heartwarming. And I viewed that as an indication of the type of service that I had delivered to the general staff in the organization.
I believe your life changed at the PIC when your reporting line changed.
Yes, I think after the reporting line changes, generally the delivery from IT took strain, whether from a speed perspective, and I'm talking about turnaround of responses that we required from the CFO as our line manager, either for developing new projects, spending of any sort that was within or outside of my delegation of authority. They would lie such submissions or requests to spend would lie with the CFO for extended period of time. In fact, at that time there was a GM of finance that had been appointed, and they would largely lie on that GM of finance's desk until I'll call it when things really started to fall apart. That's when there was actual movement around that. So it became difficult as well to keep the team motivated, because at that point they were now used to the speed at which we were moving and the continuous work that we were delivering to the organization. We found ourselves in a bit of a lull. More than anything else, I think the process of restructuring, we found that the IT structure or the proposed IT structure that I had developed and engaged EXCO on was not approved. The approval thereof kept on being moved out for one reason or another.
Question? You know, what caused these frosty relationships between you and the CFO? What could have been the cause?
Mr. Commissioner, with respect, I still ask myself that question today. I can only talk about my experience or my views in that regard. I don't think there's an incident or single incident that contributed to it. But from a behavioral perspective, I think one, listening to the testimony of Mr. Jack yesterday, and it brought back a quick memory of the Deloitte climate survey that was run within the organization, that basically asked questions at staff members relating to either their management or their experience within the organization at large. and the IT department was notably, and quite notably, one of the most positive feedbacks, or gave the most positive feedback from a leadership perspective to that survey. That was the one thing that I felt did not so that was the one incident I can put my finger on. I think during the restructuring process, the CFO was quite adamant, and the words that she would use was, there are too many chiefs in this organization, and that's part of the reason why we need to restructure. Even at the point of my the increase that I got, the 40% increase that I got, I could see that there was there was a bit of unhappiness or lack of support or any congratulatory remarks coming from her. So I'm not really certain on what caused the relationship, but I can tell you that I generally do what I believe is right. At times when statements are made openly around IT, I very quickly try to demystify those statements. And those statements usually, more often than not, were of a negative nature. I'll give an example. When I joined the PIC, there was a senior manager that had originally been leading the IT function. My joining, the CFO indicated that that person had not been suitable to lead the PIC's IT aspirations to the next level, and I opted to keep that person within the organization and just readjust the role, and found that she actually blossomed in the new role that she was put in. So there's a number of engagements that just pointed to this frostiness. So in essence, the characteristics of why I felt there was a conflict between the CFO and myself, she made it very difficult to meet for any one-on-one meetings. One-on-one meetings, ordinarily, you'd want to make sure there's alignment between yourself and your principal, your boss. We need to make sure that you can escalate certain matters of urgency, and to make sure that there's a continued focus as well on the role of IT within the organization, and that it just can't be relegated to a support function, but actually an enabler of business change. And in the PIC context, it was quite critical. These, moving on to 8.5, Mr. Commissioner, there were persistent negative comments, as I've indicated, about IT, both in meetings and outside of those meetings. These sentiments extended into the inconsistent balance scorecard process and bonus allocations, which were largely led by the CFO. And I say largely led by the CFO because it was open knowledge. The bonus payouts were calculated on a spreadsheet and manipulated for weeks on end until a desired outcome by the CFO was reached. The rating of my staff was subject to committee discussions, even staff that is at the most junior level and hardly ever interact with any other people within the organization. They would be scrutinized in context of what their value is to the organization. So during my tenure at the PIC, I witnessed a number of incidents where salaries were adjusted for select group of individuals based on what the CFO had to say. Of course, this was done in such a way that adherence to process was a box that was easy to tick, and largely facilitated through I'd call it collusive behavior with some of the executive heads. So in other words, there would be a degree of lobbying that happens, and you can actually tell in deliberations that people have had prior meetings to hone in on certain matters.
Would it be correct to summarize it to say that it was not an objective and fair process?
Yes, Mr. Commissioner, it was definitely not fair, it was not consistent, and neither was it objective. In 8.6, I outline again, after the change in reporting line, all the business cases and systems improvement aspirations that the IT team had developed in conjunction with business, by the way, were not supported, but rather they were always met with deflection as far as possible. And by deflection, I would make this type of example. If the IT team showed a need to upgrade systems due to lack of support or supportability of that system, because some of these systems are packages that I bought, and the bulk of them are bought in the US or the UK. When you fall a number of versions behind, the vendor then discontinues the support of those systems. Support comes in the form of bugs that may be logged or uncovered, system problems, even enhancements that you may require to business processes that need to be orchestrated through systems. So it gave us it put us in a catch-22 position from a change enablement perspective. It was also interesting to note that an asset manager the size of the public investment corporation would still, in this day and age, be calculating bonuses from spreadsheets and sending those spreadsheets around on email, where people's salary information or employees' salary information is contained. So it's by no shock that I knew exactly who was getting what type of increase and on what basis within the organization at any given time. It is not because I went to look for that information, it's because that information was sent to me. So quite significantly, the systems that were not upgraded, and I believe now there seems to be some movement in that area, was the high portfolio system, which was the investment administration system, which was at least 8 versions behind. There was the Charles River investment management solution, which eventually got upgraded on the strength of me wanting to demonstrate a certain report that Dr. Den wanted to have access to, and it hadn't been available in the previous version. There was a need for a new private equity system, or a system to manage the Isibaya unlisted investment business. In prior years, there had been an attempt to implement a system called eFront. That attempt did not go down too well, mainly due to customizations that were put into the system that rendered it unsupportable. Nonetheless, I did lead a team of people that were drawn from the business, not IT people, onto a fact-finding mission around the suitability of this eFront system. And they largely felt it was what they needed, but none of them were willing to put their heads on the block to say they're in support of that. The upgrade of the financial management system, which is a Microsoft Dynamics application, came at a point where there were no more what I'll call security patches available for that, which were critical to keep the system alive. And support really was ending on that system as well. So it was one of those, within a week, approval is then granted after a year of engagement, and no change, material change in the submissions, approval is then granted to say proceed with upgrading the system.
Can you please explain this Microsoft Dynamics much more?
So the finance team largely is with the user of it's an enterprise resource planning package, usually referred to as an ERP. So it's in the same, and at its core is where the organization's general ledger would sit. I'm trying very hard not to compare it to other systems in the market, but that's the essence. The finance team.
SAP, it will be like a SAP, financial management of SAP.
Absolutely, absolutely. In around about January 2016, and again on this date, probably it could have been November 2015, I was asked to join a team of business, senior business representatives to evaluate bidders for the management of global equities. And my mandate in joining that team was to assess those bidders' suitability from a technology perspective. And I note this because it speaks to the earlier question, Mr. Commissioner, of where does this frosty relationship come from, and the behaviors that were associated with my tenure there. When we spent hours on end with this team looking at not only the business functionality that they were responding to, but also the technology solutions that they were putting forward for really managing the global equities space. Part of the process was also conducting site visits. You'll appreciate that because it was global equities, the bulk of the bidders were international bidders in the UK and the USA in particular. However, when it was time to do the site visits, which were international site visits, the CFO went ahead with the GM of finance. They were not participating in the bid process, but they nonetheless said they will be the ones who are going to assess the IT capabilities because they are more suited to doing so. So that's another example of where there was no sense really in some of the actions from the CFO. It's equally important to note that at that point in time, the GM of finance was essentially making the decisions that the CFO would have needed to make, and largely was playing a gatekeeping function. Because I could not now have one-on-one meetings with the CFO, when I did manage to get a word in, it's either she directed me to go talk to the CEO. When I did talk to the CEO, he said, go talk to your line manager. So I was caught in a very difficult situation there. At a point, the CFO took issue with my study bursary.
Just a question, yeah. Before you leave the point on the IT, you mentioned stuff about the upgrades, and the time it took to make them. So I just wanted to check, and as part of our terms of reference, when you left the PIC, how was the IT, standards there? Sort of how were the standards there? Were they good? Were they fit for purpose? Or there were many gaps in the tech, within the PIC?
Thanks, Mr. Commissioner. I'd say there were many gaps. However, it is not gaps that we were not aware of. And those business cases were actually meant to deal with those gaps. a simple example is aspirationally the PIC wanted to have a straight-through processing capability, and I won't call it a single system, but capability. Now, that would have enabled all the critical functions, particularly in the listed space, to be automated largely, be it interactions with the JSE, clients, reporting, investment administration. So we had the best-in-class systems, but the problem was that they were dated. And we just couldn't get past this hurdle of the need to just make them more relevant and integrate the systems. So in that sense, it's a bit of both. There were gaps, but we had the right systems already in place.
Some more gaps? Any other bigger gaps, big gaps?
I think the big, sorry.
That's the biggest one. I think straight is the biggest one.
Straight through processing was one gap. On the investment, on the Isibaya side, was even a larger gap. And that larger gap was the fact that there was no asset management system there. The entire organization, and again, with huge exposure, was largely managed from spreadsheets, which not only poses technology risks, it poses data leakage, security risks, and it would be difficult to say who changed what number where at any given time. So the biggest gap was auditability across the board and the integrity of the data that sits within those functions.
Security? What about security? Both just normal security and then cyber security?
Thanks, Mr. Commissioner. Yes, definitely security was a gap. There was a move at some point to start a data classification exercise. There was a resistance from the top, or rather lack of support from the CFO and the CEO in starting that data classification exercise. Securing spreadsheets is a difficult endeavor, mainly because you can either walk out with them on a memory stick, you can send them over email, you can't really audit either than the last modified person who's actually changed what data elements there. So security was a big gap in that regard, and also noted in the business cases. Mr. Commissioner, moving to point 8.8, another source of this friction, or what I'd attribute the friction to, at some point there was an issue taken about my study bursary, which was a very bizarre situation to engage my line manager on. The questions being asked were not asked generally in a normal course of events from other employees. Number one is I cannot award myself a study bursary, neither will I pay for the study bursary or pay whatever institution that I'm enrolled in for those studies if I've got a study bursary with the PIC. The study bursary was administered by the Human Resource Department, which of course reported to the CFO as well. On final signature, seeking final signature to make payment to the university, I was asked who approved the bursary in the first place, what relevance is it to my work, and then there was a process to start investigating my leave balances linked to this study bursary request. Again, I felt that was quite bizarre, and when we went past that conversation, I found myself being invited to meetings during scheduled exam periods, meetings that were critical, balance scorecard related meetings. So I would find myself having an exam in the morning, but sitting in an EXCO meeting the whole day, the day before. And I believe that it was deliberate. The CFO knew very well what my calendar looked like because I had expressed, I had shared the exam calendar a month at least beforehand. In August 2015 is another incident which up to now I have not questioned and I've had to emotionally navigate my way through. I went on leave after agreeing a certain score with regards to my performance, and I'd like Mr. Commissioner to note that the performance score is not something that you just award to yourself. You actually reach agreement on with your line manager and you sign off on that score.
Just to get it enough emphasis, it was an agreed performance score.
That's correct, Mr. Commissioner. The bonus payout was done during the period while I was on leave. When I returned, I queried why the number was less than what I had originally expected. And I was told that the performance score had been revised downwards, and there was no further information forthcoming in that regard. I also did not get my short-term incentive letter. So from a procedure perspective, when you're allocated a bonus, before it's paid out, you get a letter that will indicate your performance score and the bonus payout that you're receiving. And there would be a second letter as well that indicates your long-term incentive if it's not covered in that short-term incentive letter. I did not receive any of those letters. I did query about it, and up to today I do not have any evidence that I actually received a bonus except for the appearance of it on the annual report.
The point you're making is this was all done, first of all, when you were on leave and without any communication or justification furnished to you.
That's correct, Mr. Commissioner. And again, this was now 2015. And even after the revision of that score downwards, my performance was still above just satisfactory. It had moved from the excellent mark to a bit of above good. So I made the numbers required to qualify for a short-term incentive and to get a long-term incentive allocation, which is generally a 3.5 in the scale that was being used within the PIC, 3.5 out of 5. With all these challenges, during the period of November, December 2015, there was a lot of change even at board level. I developed the first terms of reference for a new board subcommittee that would be looking at IT, which was called the ICT Governance Committee. In February 2016, the first sitting of that board subcommittee, I presented to them the IT strategy, IT governance framework, and the IT security strategy, and bringing them up to speed with the types of systems and challenges that we are currently experiencing or were currently being experienced within the PIC. I bring this up because it was a very lonely venture. Quite notably, the CFO as my line manager, let alone executive director, was not present in that meeting. Neither was the CEO. I do not know why, but the sequence of events thereafter actually clarified my speculation in that regard. in section 9, Mr. Commissioner, I deal with the suspension. It's going to be difficult for me to navigate it a bit without breaching this.
You can proceed. We'll assist you.
Okay. In around about February 2016, one of my employees approached me and indicated that the executive head of risk had been asking what she termed strange questions about me. And this employee approached me at about 6 in the evening, so far after working hours, and she wanted to warn me that since and she referred to, they want you out of the organization. Without, again, I will not be at liberty to, unless I'm compelled to actually state the name of the employee. But that was the first indication that something was amiss in the organization. During that same month, I saw that there were problems with a date function on the investment admin system. And the chief risk officer, who was fairly new, even in the use of that system, including the staff members that there'd been a lot of attrition in those departments. So some of the people who knew, call it the operational processes related to the use of systems, were no longer there, and there had been no handover, so to speak. We battled with this date function, which basically rendered incorrect calculations. The notion at the time was that it is the responsibility of IT to fix it. And my response to that, while it is the responsibility of IT to assist in everything, there are functions that business need to fulfill. We don't use the systems. We make sure that they're available, they're secure, they're well maintained, and where it needs us to, where we are required to assist business in the use of those systems, then we'll do so. Nonetheless, on Friday the 26th of February 2016, at about 5, Dr. Machila convened a meeting with the executive head of risk, his executive assistant, and one or two members from the investment administration system, if I recall, investment administration unit, if I recall correctly, wherein, again, the discussion basically went out of context from this date issue, but there were sweeping remarks about competence in IT, which I really didn't want to deal with. That one, it was a Friday evening. Two, it was not the place or the right forum to be making those types of remarks. Nonetheless, I left the organization and went home, and I called a number of other asset managers, particularly looking for assistance in people who knew how to configure these systems. And these are business people who knew how to configure these systems. I ended up having agreements to reconvene a conversation with them on the Monday morning. However, on Monday, the 29th of February, between 7 and 7:30 in the morning, the CEO requested his driver to come and call me from my office. I was already at the office at that time. And he indicated to me that he had received a whistleblower complaint against me to the effect that there is favoritism in my department, and I am suspended as of that moment. I then had to meet up with a team from outside the organization. I assume this was from Bowman Kilifian.
Can I just check one thing about the date issue? The date issue. The system, was it something developed internally or was it something external? And you said it made wrong calculations. How serious was that in terms of the calculations?
Thanks, Mr. Commissioner. The system was not internally developed. It is an off-the-shelf package. So it was aimed at investment administration. However, it's one of those systems. In fact, it was particularly the system that was 8 versions behind. Yeah, so it was at, I think, a version 4 or 5 at the time, and the latest version out in the market was version 13 or something of that sort. And support for that system had basically lapsed, had been discontinued by the vendor, at least for 4 years prior to that. We did, however, Mr. Commissioner, have an agreement with an external resource who assisted from time to time on the use of that particular version of that system. And that's how actually the date function was found to be the source of the problem. In terms of the calculations, they were not significant from a number perspective, because they were being picked up via reports. So it is unlike that, these reports were sent away before the problem was actually uncovered. So to say that the calculations were incorrect, it was based on a check that was done between the expected numbers.
And that problem could be solved quickly, or it would have taken days and weeks and all that?
Mr. Commissioner, that problem was solved simply by updating the calendar function. So I would assume, and I'm speculating, that it was actually solved the day after my suspension, because that's when the external help came in, was on a Monday. So it would have been resolved in that time period. So this whistleblower complaint, I was not given any documentation or indication of what this favoritism allegation was about. Nonetheless, this team from the external law firm took my computer, iPad, and iPhone, and also requested that I give them my external hard drives, which were personal hard drives, on the strength that I would have connected them to my work computer at some point. I then left the premises and drove back home. After a month of not hearing anything from the PIC, I wrote an email to Dr. Machila, citing several issues that I have with the suspensions, and some of them were procedural in nature.
Can I, sorry to interrupt again, can I just ask you, were you given any opportunity to provide reasons to Dr. Machila why you should not be suspended?
Mr. Commissioner, I was not provided with such an opportunity. In fact, the suspension letter was not even handed to me at that time. It was instead delivered to my house later on, if not the day after, by the driver of the PIC.
Why I'm asking this, in this letter, which is Annexure C to your statement, in paragraph 3 it is stated, "We confirm that you were given the opportunity to consider our proposal to suspend you, and that you were given the opportunity to make representations in this regard. You elected not to make representations." Is that correct or incorrect?
Mr. Commissioner, it's correct that is what the email to the response from Dr. Machila was, but it is incorrect that I was given that opportunity, or whether I elected not to make representations as to why I shouldn't be suspended. I surely would have, had I been afforded that opportunity.
You have dealt in detail with what happened thereafter, but you were then requested to meet an investigating team on the 1st of April at Bowman Gilfillan offices in Sandton, which you attended. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Commissioner. And in that team, and I must apologize, Mr. Commissioner, I actually found some of my notes only this morning because this is from some years back. In the team were three attorneys. I had no legal representation because I did not even know the context of the meeting. I was asked a number of questions. I also posed the question as to what exactly am I being investigated for. I was told there were 3 anonymous whistleblower complaints, and the issues raised were related to procurement, and they mentioned 3 suppliers. I responded to them that in fact those suppliers I found at the PIC had already been appointed by somebody else, and the only thing I have done with them is improve their service. I believe those suppliers are still with the PIC up to now. On the favoritism inquiry, it was not even couched as sexual harassment, it was favoritism. I was asked whether I had any intimate relationships with my staff members. At some point there was a direct question that, or they put it to me, that I had been seen kissing an employee in the middle of the passageway. My answer to that was to query whether it was in broad daylight or not. Then there was a question around my qualifications, whether I indeed have these qualifications. And lastly, there was a question around companies that I was a director on. Now, for Mr. Commissioner, I think for that one, I indicated no. And the basis of my indicating no is that there were companies that I was registered as a director from, but they never actually functioned. It was companies that, one, Crusher Investment Holdings was a company that my family and I had set up in 2004, thereabout, with particular interest in exploring the taxi business and opportunities around transportation. I indicated that all those companies had never actually traded nor even hold any banking accounts. So it was neither here nor there. Yeah, I think that's the summary of the notes that I'd made in that interview process.
If I understand you correctly, you say you were asked whether there were companies on which you were a director, and you said no, whilst there were companies that had you registered as their directors. Do I understand you correctly?
That's correct, Mr. Commissioner.
Mr. Commissioner, I note it's the normal tea time. I'm in your hands. Can we perhaps finish this witness? I hope to finish within the next 20 minutes. Otherwise, we can have the tea. I'm in your hands.
All right, I'm outvoted. Let's continue.
As it pleases you, Mr. Commissioner. All right, you were then, it was about a 2-hour interrogation session, as stated in 9.3.6. And after this, on a date in May, you were requested to attend a meeting with Dr. Machila. That is 9.3.8 of your statement. Can you just deal with that, please?
Sorry, Chair. Can I just ask a question of the witness? You indicated that you had not you did not have legal representation. Was that by choice or because you did not know the nature of the meeting you were going to?
Thanks, Mr. Commissioner. I was not aware of the nature of the meeting. Neither was I aware. In fact, I was told that because it is an internal investigation, I cannot bring external legal representation, and that's how the policy at the time was actually constructed around disciplinary processes.
But the investigation was conducted by an external party, Bowman Gilfillan.
That's correct, Mr. Commissioner.
Did any of those attorneys advise you that you're entitled to legal representation?
There was, at the meeting, I was told legal representation is allowed. This was when the meeting was already convened. And there was a recording that was being made, but would not be made available to any party.
Thank you. Please continue.
So after this was now April 2016. I then again went home to wait for the outcome of this interview, which I thought was a very small interview based on the time I spent and the number of questions I answered. I was then contacted by one of the employees of the PIC, particularly from the HR department, under the guise of extending some type of emotional support. I was suspicious of that phone call, but went ahead and said, it is clear what the CFO and the CEO want to achieve, but there are certain terms they would need to fulfill if they really want me to leave the PIC that badly. And I mention this because when I met with Dr. Matjila in May, he first indicated that the report has been finalized and it's damning, it's in its findings. I asked him for a copy of the report or to see it. He said no, he would rather not. If he gives me this report, it means that we are going to now start a formal process which is going to be long-winded and potentially damaging to my career. Of course, I sat across and I said, my response was, look, you make the determination of how you want to proceed with this thing, and let me know. I then left that meeting. On the 20th of May, I was invited back to meet with Dr. Matjila, and he had the settlement agreement drawn up with exactly the terms that I had set out to the HR staff member who had called me previously.
Thank you. We're not going to deal then with the terms as embodied in the settlement agreement. Can you proceed on 9.4? 9.4.
Just a question, Kate Lube. That report, do you know whether that report was done? Is it available? Is that something we can even look at?
It has not been provided to my legal or the forensic team, Mr. Commissioner, but we will again, in view of this evidence, request that report from the PIC. I will report to you during the day or tomorrow morning whether that is available.
Okay, all right, thanks.
I might be mistaken, but didn't you write either an email or a letter to Dr. Matjila and put to him the terms upon which you could leave the organization?
Mr. Commissioner, no. I did not write putting the terms under which we could leave. Instead, the terms were presented at the meeting. What I did have is a conversation prior to that meeting with a junior member of staff in HR. And I took it as, I made those comments knowingly that it was a very odd phone call of an expression of support from that particular person. and I did it very well, that they'd be carrying a message through. So as part of 9.4, Mr. Commissioner, I submit that at no point was there any indication, neither was I ever found guilty of sexual harassment or procurement irregularities. I'd like to deal with particularly the procurement irregularities in particular. I created a method that would not put me in a conversation related to procurement or particularly irregularities related to procurement. And that method was multifold. Number one is I refused to meet with any service providers or potential service providers outside of the PIC premises as a rule of thumb. Number two, I was never part of any bid committees. Where I did attend a bid session, it was in the global equities tender as indicated. Other than that, I just provided advisory services on technology and types of technology. So a comparison between one type of laptop versus another type of laptop. That's the only type of information, I think, simply as an example I would make. Obviously, there are more complex tools and IT infrastructure that I'd have to make comparisons between. Secondly, our procurement process was developed in such a way that it involved a number of departments, let alone a number of people. So predetermining an outcome was highly unlikely. We had a legal department involved in that. I also had requested as a collaboration mechanism and to upskill the internal audit members, that they also participate in the oversight, providing oversight of the process long before it actually ends, and they'll understand context of the various technologies and how they are put together, so that when they have to put on their auditing hat, their independent hat, they have full context of the processes and how technology is selected and the likes. So there were, I'd call it a number of assurance functions that were involved in the bid process, and I questioned this procurement irregularity sentiment. I heard it when Mrs. Decker was giving evidence towards the end, that she expressed that's what she had heard. I don't think she was making an allegation against me. But I also have it on good information that one of the emails that had been sent to staff also spoke to this, and I wanted to really correct that narrative. So neither procurement irregularities on my part, nor was there any sexual harassment charges put forward to me. Not even a complainant from such a perspective.
Can you then proceed to paragraph 10, please?
Thanks, Mr. Commissioner. I think, yeah, the rest in paragraph 9 deals with some of the contents of this separation agreement. In paragraph 10, I'm merely providing, Mr. Commissioner, my opinions on the factors leading to my suspension and separation from the PIC. One, there were serious institutionalized problems within the PIC, especially in relation to leadership from the executives. The CFO, who was an executive director, would openly make comments at times that she's the only executive director or director that does not have a term limit. So even Dr. Machila was on a contract, she was not on a contract, and she will remain a director for time immemorial. And as such, she viewed herself as indispensable to the organization. She led a culture that was highly divisive. There was a meeting which which happened in 2015, with the newly appointed executive head, or they might have been acting at the time. I'm not certain on the date, but the year was 2015, after Dr. Machila's appointment and after the appointment of these acting heads or confirmation of those acting heads. This meeting was attended by senior managers as well within the organization, and it was couched as a strategic planning meeting. So it was a getaway session, and in that meeting, the whole theme was the executive heads really presenting the strategy from their different business units. When it was time for myself to present, the biggest oddity and possibly one of the most significant risk areas is technology in an asset management organization. I was not given an opportunity to even go through that strategy presentation. Instead, I was asked about why we are using Dell laptops instead of Apple laptops, and that became the discussion for the next hour and a half. And it was led by the CFO and one or two other executive heads. So there were very bizarre behaviors that were actually coming through. I did not record that in the statement. It's something that is actually coming back to me now. The rampant unfairness in salary reviews, adjustments, and bonus allocations were all orchestrated by the CFO. We know, and everybody knew, that she was the last one to click save on that spreadsheet. Where numbers did not meet for certain people the objectives or what she termed principles she had set out, she would manually adjust those numbers. The role of HR in that was a bit blurry. In particular, there was a gentleman who looked after the spreadsheets, who sat within the HR function and was subsequently moved to finance, but with no additional responsibilities. And it is, again, lastly, I do submit that there was a personal vendetta against me. I don't think it was just merely to me, as you would have heard from Mrs. Decker. I think there were a select group of people that experienced problems with the CFO. Some of them senior managers who subsequently left the organization under different circumstances. I believe that there's a lot to be answered for, and the Commission should actually request records of these spreadsheets, but not just dating back over a period of 2 years. You'll pick up a pattern if you look at how salaries were adjusted over a period of 5 to 6 years. I know for a fact that there are people who have increased their salaries in the past 4 years by over R1 million or thereabout, without any significant change to their job functions, merely because they are viewed as people who toe the line and do as they are told. So that would be the last part of my submission.
Just for the record, Mr. Commissioner, the legal and forensic teams of the Commission have already requested these spreadsheets. It will be dealt with in evidence before the Commission. But before I conclude this evidence, there are two matters I would like to ask still. You mentioned in your evidence, and it's not in your statement, that you now, in consultation and preparing for your testimony, remember the Deloitte survey. Can you recall, and we're going to, it is before the Commission, where did the IT team come out in the Deloitte survey? Were you bottom of the top, middle, where were you?
Thanks, Mr. Commissioner. My recollection is that we were actually at the very, very top. So not in the top 10, we were the top. And by way of context, that survey was assessing how the department itself is being led. So it was a climate survey. It was about how engaged employees are It was about how they receive leadership from the top. It was not skewed to one particular person, but basically, I think we had over a 90% hit rate from the people who answered, responded to the survey. So it was a broad survey, and IT actually had the most significant results.
A last issue from my side. I imagine there will be a couple of questions from the... Can I abuse your attendance here by asking you about this ghost we have in this commission called Nogu or Noku? How difficult is it in the IT cyber world to trace this type of person spreading information to the PIC and the media and public in general? If that, let me narrow my question, if that email is not sent from a PIC computer linked to the PIC server, how difficult is it to identify this ghost?
Thanks, Mr. Commissioner. It would be extremely difficult if you don't have certain parameters that you work with. So if you cannot identify the location of where the email was sent from, physical location related to an IP address of some sort, it does make it difficult. But if you can narrow it down to an address, a physical address, so a street address, and there's surveillance as an example around that address, you can actually locate a person and do your deductions based on that. But the nature of email is that it operates on the strength of the World Wide Web, and that is exactly where the challenge lies, in that you can route messages through various servers across the world, across the globe. But where you have a source from a physical perspective and you've been able to isolate that, it then becomes other supporting evidence that will assist you in concluding who sent that email. But it will be very difficult to pin down exactly who.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. That concludes the evidence. If you have any further questions.
Yes, thank you. I'm not sure. I don't think you dealt with all of paragraph 9. But if I'm correct, do you confirm that what is contained there is correct?
Mr. Commissioner, I confirm that what is contained there is correct. It's difficult to navigate the conversation without going into the contents of the agreement as well.
I understand that. Okay.
I would just like to come to that last point that you made about the payroll and the salaries. If I understand you correctly, and obviously we'll be getting the report from the records, but what you're indicating there was that if people simply turned a blind eye to what was happening, they would get salary increases beyond normal, in essence, for just minding their own business and letting things happen. Is that what the implication is?
Thanks, Mr. Commissioner. I think that is the implication. I do, however, want to highlight that the PIC does have largely a lot of highly qualified people with good intentions who find themselves in a difficult situation. So yes, on any given day, you would find that there is a declaration that says we are now adjusting salaries for one or other reason, and go and apply this to your different business units. Of course, you would take those parameters and say, if the rationale that's given is restructuring, there'll be a narrative associated with there'll be a justification, always. And it was quite weird. In the 3.5 years I spent there, we might have gone through salary adjustments and restructuring at least about 5 or 6 times in a space of, 36 months. So yes, people did turn a blind eye. They did question why, but they could easily see what the desired outcome was to some of their colleagues as well. We had situations where staff members that were junior and literally coming out of university, joining the organization, and by way of example, earning 350,000 rands cost to company, which is decent for any junior coming out of university, winding up within a 6-month period earning 750,000 rands, without even having gone through one cycle of performance review. We had situations like that. We had situations where unintentionally or intentionally, staff members that winded up earning more than their managers in certain areas. And it's really around those instances that the focus must be put. It was quite prominent, especially for employees that worked in the Isibaya space. Some of those employees actually left the organization to start other, call it asset management or financial services companies, and their sole client became the PIC. So they basically went and started bringing deals to the PIC and getting paid commission based on the deal origination fees.
If I could just follow with that second part, is that if I understand you correctly, that an employee in Isibaya would look at the opportunities, would say, okay, I now know how this works, go out, set up their own company, and become the middleman, bringing a deal to the PIC and getting paid for bringing that deal. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Commissioner. It's the more lucrative approach than earning a salary. And if I'm incorrect in this regard, which I doubt I am, but if there is an investigation in that regard, that's where you'd need to follow the money.
And then finally, you've indicated very strongly in your testimony and in your elaboration of points that you regard yourself as having been victimized for various reasons. Are you aware of victimization of others in a similar manner to yourself and people you worked with?
Yes, absolutely, Mr. Commissioner. There are many others, more than a handful that I am aware of. The names, I think, can be furnished if actually required by the Commission. We've had exits from internal audit at a senior level. We've had the legal team also been subjected to a significant degree of victimization. The former CEO is the most notable victim of circumstances at the PIC. Petro Decker, the former CRO as well. So this victimization came in various shapes and forms and actually attacked a number of people. There are some colleagues that weathered the storm and have emerged, I don't know whether better, but have managed to stay at the PIC and recognize that it is cyclical in some instances. I dare say even colleagues within the corporate secretariat function as well had very big issues, and my apologies to them for putting him under that spotlight, but that is my opinion and my observation.
Okay. One question, from my side. You are thieves with Ms. Matsepo More. if you could maybe give us some texture or, or some context in the sense that take us into the room, sort of, because here it's words and all that. What was happening there? I mean, what were they shouting matches, personality clashes, high octane corporate politics? Just give us some color, around that to understand it further, please, if you can.
Thanks, Mr. Commissioner. I think I've tried to outline what I would term very, very silly engagements. Things like, and engagements that she had the ability to hide behind process. Things like making it very known that I'm now investigating how you got a bursary in the first place. I'm now investigating your leave balances, not anybody else's, your leave balances. I'm now not going to sign an agreement with Microsoft because I don't trust you. When you start building your team, and I must say, one of the investigation points, excuse me, Mr. Commissioner, one of the investigation points asked me about a trip to Washington, D.C. that I took with some of my staff members. I want Mr. Commissioner just to note circumstances around that. I took a team of 4 staff members and 2 from JIPA, 2 staff members from JIPA, on a paid-for engagement, paid for by the World Bank, to go and discuss issues around IT strategy, security, straight-through processing, all the, call it strategic objectives that we had at that point in time. Part of that trip was showing where we are and juxtaposing it with how the World Bank is dealing with some of those challenges. It was a 5-day trip. Over and above the 4 staff members, excuse me, I had 5 staff members that actually joined us. The 5th one had actually just returned from maternity leave, but because of her seniority, I felt that she must not lose that opportunity, because Washington DC is not around the corner. If we don't have that engagement, then it might not happen. And we went through this process. Instead of the support I would have expected from the CFO, I was being questioned around why these people, and I'd ask why these people versus which people. This was my IT management team. This is not a popularity contest, or even where I had problems with some of them from a performance perspective. To turn around their performance, I needed to go and show them how things are done out there. So applying this multi-factor training and education and upskilling from a people perspective. And that I make this example because that was the essence of some of these tips. So I don't know whether you'd call it a personality clash or corporate politics or just meanness. But I located them in at any given time. It occupied at least one of those 3. It is quite telling as well that during my entire suspension and eventual separation from the organization, there was no engagement with my line manager, being Ms. Matsapamore. And that on its own is odd, but it did point me to the fact that this was a hack job, for lack of a better description, that was being conducted on me. And the tiffs in meetings would show themselves by cutting off a person mid-speech. So you ask a question. If a sensible answer is being advanced, you realize that actually this answer is not going to advance the agenda that you actually had. So you'd cut off mid-sentence. And yes, there were shouting matches, even within, not between me and her directly, but within the EXCO meeting. She'd raise her voice, in a very, you didn't know what you were going to deal with at any given time when you walked into an EXCO meeting. That's essentially the sum of the parts there.
Okay, thanks. And I'm quite sure Ms. Moore will come and give her own version in time, I'm sure. Thank you very much.
I hope so. Thanks, Mr. Commissioner.
Can I just ask, you mentioned, I think it's in 10.3 of your statement, the salary unfairness in salary reviews, adjustments, and bonus allocations. Whose responsibility was that? One person, a committee? The function of reviewing salaries and allocating bonuses?
Mr. Commissioner, on paper, it's the responsibility of executives and human resources. In reality, there's never been a situation where any executive or human resources have, in my tenure, they have submitted salary adjustments or performance reviews and they've gone off unchanged in totality by the CFO.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Commissioner.
Mr. Commissioner, I'm sorry, my colleague just drew my attention to this. Just in a minute or two, can you just explain to the Commission your understanding of giving somebody in the IT department super admin access? What is meant by that?
Mr. Commissioner, the context of admin access is at a call it a vertical service level. So it's admin access for email, or it's admin access for your network, or it's admin access for your firewall. So super admin access is always linked to either a service or infrastructure itself. There would be no super admin access that basically allows you to do everything within the PIC. There'd be super admin access at a server level, there'd be super admin access at a switch level from a network perspective, or super admin access from an email perspective. I'd like to believe that this is in context of email. And in the PIC's infrastructure, one of the key services was what's called the Mimecast service, which is a mail archiving and security product, which basically is usually administered by a senior enough resource within IT. That resource's name or credentials are provided to Mimecast through an official sign-off from an executive or the CEO of the organization. So generally the Mimecast model works in that manner. So when you do have that super admin access, it means that you have got the ability to look at everybody's emails to perform various functions, either blocking or even deletion of those emails. Although the value proposition from Mimecast is that they don't ever allow for the deletion of emails. But to remove it from, call it the user workstation, you'd have those types of rights.
Thank you. Mr. Commissioner, that is the evidence.
No, yeah.
And if I may ask, where are you now? What's happening?
I'm gainfully employed, Mr. Commissioner, in the I rejoined the job market in February 2017.
I'm afraid I've got to ask you this question. to do with our terms of reference. 9.3.9.2. Is that untrue or true that you were found with confidential information on your laptop?
Mr. Commissioner, it is true in every sense. However, as an executive, it would be difficult to say what confidential information I was not supposed to have on my laptop, given the following. Board matters are circulated via email and find themselves onto the laptop. Salary adjustments, including spreadsheets, are circulated via email and find themselves on laptops. General engagement with my line manager for a large part of about a year was via email. So there was context as to why that was put in the recorder, which I also deal with in, and why I felt I'm not going to fight it, because I viewed it as a statement that is neither here nor there. The most senior IT executive, as to whether I had confidential information around deals or in the investment space, maybe, but the confidentiality is not for me to prove. I've never sought information that was not sent to me, Mr. Commissioner.
And that information, the alleged confidential information, was never specified or disclosed to you. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Commissioner.
Yes, thank you. That's what I wanted to hear. And I was a bit surprised and wondered whether, as head of IT, things wouldn't come via your way, whatever it was.
Thanks, Mr. Commissioner. Yeah, that's the essence of the trouble I had with that statement, and that's why I viewed it as similar to being charged with breathing at work.
Yes, Mr. Ndwana, thank you so much for availing yourself to come and testify before us. It has helped us a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Can we have the adjournment till 12?
Yes, we'll adjourn until 12. That's correct. And Mr. Ndwana, you are excused. But you might be called again later, I don't know. All right? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner.
of Business Leadership. I'm a certified information system security professional. I'm a certified information security manager. I'm a certified ISO 27001 lead implementer. I'm a certified Sherwood applied business security architect. I'm a certified payment card industry professional, and I'm also certified in risk and information systems control. My role as Senior Manager Information Security Risk and Governance involves, amongst other things, the development and implementation of PIC's information security and risk strategy. I've attached my job description. As you'll notice, one of my key performance areas was to continuously monitor and report on IT security risks, cyber attacks, IT controls, and effectiveness of those controls. During my 17 years in IT, I've been awarded the following accolades. I've received an award for service excellence and going an extra mile. That was awarded in 2006 by Standard Bank. I received an award for service excellence in 2006 by Standard Bank. I received the top performance award in 2007 by Standard Bank. I received an exceptional contribution award, which was awarded by a company called UCS Solutions in 2014.
Just a quick question, Mr. Maisela. Your doctorate, what are you studying it in? What are you studying there in your doctorate?
So I'm doing a research on information security investments and how behavioral artifacts affect information security investment decision making. Okay, as a genesis, on the 5th September 2017, the Executive Committee, EXCO invitees, and senior managers of PIC had a strategic planning session at the Deep in the Berg in Pretoria East. At around 1 p.m., after we had our lunch break, and we were about to go back to the boardroom where the session was held, the Chief Financial Officer, Ms. Matsepo More, and Executive Head of Human Resources, Mr. Chris Polwane, approached Ms. Vuyokazi, who was sitting with me. Ms. Vuyokazi asked me to stand up so he can formally introduce me to the CFO, as it was still my third day at PIC. As Ms. Vuyokazi was about to introduce me, the CFO and Executive Head of HR advised Ms. Vuyokazi that they have an urgent and highly confidential request for her. They instructed her in my presence to immediately block and not release all the emails with subject PIC CEO Fund's girlfriend.
Can I ask you you'd obviously just started, and in your short period there, was it usual for somebody to ask about a matter like that in front of another person that they didn't know? Was there a standard practice or not a standard practice to discuss what I would have thought would have been specific to Mrs. Menye, but in front of a person that they had not yet been introduced to? Was that something that happened frequently?
As someone new, okay, I'll base it on my previous experience. It's unusual for such a confidential request to be given in front of someone who's unknown. Okay, the subject of the email read PIC CEO Fund's girlfriend. That email was being received by some employees at PIC. Ms. Vuyokazi agreed to the instruction and advised Mr. Chris Polwane and Ms. Matsepo More that she will speak to her IT security team and that she will inform them via email after the IT security team blocked all the emails that had the aforementioned subject. Ms. Vuyokazi then introduced me to Mr. Chris Polwane and Ms. Matsepo More by saying that I will be heading that IT security team. At this juncture, I did not pay much attention to the request nor to the contents of the email. I simply regarded this request as normal request just to block spam. At around 13:50 on the 5th September 2017, I received an email from Ms. Vuyokazi. I've attached it as Annexure B. It was sent to the IT security team group or distribution list. It requested us to block, blacklist, and not to release any emails with subject PIC CEO Fund's girlfriend. Both Mr. Chris Polwane and Ms. Matsepo More were copied on that email request. At around 14:52 on the same day, which is the 5th September 2017, I received another email from Ms. Vuyokazi attached as Annexure C, confirming to Ms. Matsepo More that her instructions have been executed accordingly and that the emails have been forwarded to the CEO together with the list of all the people who were the intended recipients of that email. Later on the 13th of September 2017, another email was received from James Nogu with the subject PIC CEO Fund's girlfriend. I've attached that email as Annexure D. It contained damaging allegations of criminal conduct on the part of the CEO of PIC. However, on this occasion, it appeared that the email was sent to a wider list of recipients. What I by that I mean it was sent to all the distribution lists within PIC. So almost everyone within PIC was the intended recipient. So the email contained an attachment with the file name paid.
Just a moment.
Just one second. Just can you explain, having looked, I mean, as being responsible for the IT system and security, even if for a brief time, how would it be possible to send an email from external to all recipients in the PIC?
Okay.
And to get that entire mailing list?
For that to happen, possibly someone must have knowledge of all the distribution lists within PIC. So it's someone who had internal knowledge of all those distribution lists within PIC. However, there is a security mechanism to block someone from outside to send emails to a distribution list. At that particular point in time, that security mechanism was not in place. I did, however, subsequently implement that security control, and I do have evidence suggesting such.
Sorry, so on that basis, it could have come from outside with knowledge of the PIC lists, because you didn't have a blocking mechanism?
Yes, it would have come outside with someone who had knowledge of all the distribution lists within the PIC mailing group.
Follow-up question. Could it have come, from the inside of the PIC?
It could have come from the inside of the PIC. However, as I'm going to mention further, subsequently, we did determine that it was sent from outside.
Okay.
Okay, the email contained an attachment with the file name paid.pdf. I've attached that attachment as Annexure E. It was a memorandum written on a PIC letterhead dated 16 September 2016, seeking approval for the PIC to lease an education and healthcare mobile units from a company called Mobile Specialized Technology, which I will later on refer to it as MST, as part of PIC corporate social responsibility and corporate social investment strategy. On the same day, I received instructions from Ms. Vuyokazi Menye to conduct an investigation to determine if the James Nogu email originated from the PIC's internal network. At 2 minutes to midnight on the same day, I responded with an email containing a summary of my findings. I've attached those summary of my findings as Annexure F. So during my investigation, I established that the email was composed using a client called Roundcube, which is a webmail interface, and that the email was last relayed by a mail server, which I've given the name there, that is hosted in France. We knew that it was hosted in France based on the IP address that we found there. This IP address was found to belong to a French internet service provider called Online SAS, S.A.S. I then requested that we block the IP address of the sending mail server, which I've given the IP address. We blocked that on our mail security gateway, which we call Mimecast. So on my email, I further recommended that we obtain a Section 205 subpoena that should be served to both the internet service provider as well as webmail using the same SAPS case number. I also explained that the Section 205 subpoena can only be served by a member of SAPS once a case has been registered. I then attached an example of a Section 205 subpoena that is used for the purpose of obtaining such information from internet service providers, as I had previously worked at an internet service provider before, and similar such requests were served to me in my capacity as a Group Information Security Officer of that internet service provider that I previously worked for. Okay, the next section is around the mandate for opening this criminal case with the police. So on Friday, the 28th September 2017, the executive head of IT, Ms. Vuyokazi Menye, myself, and one of the senior security engineers, Mr. Timothy Marobana, who is to report to me, we met at the CEO's office to discuss the emails that were purportedly sent by James Nogu. Also present during this meeting was the executive head of HR, Mr. Chris Polwane. During the meeting, my security engineer, Mr. Timothy Morwane, opened one of the emails received from James Nogu on the 18th September with the subject PIC CEO Funds Girlfriend, and demonstrated to everyone who was present during that meeting how to investigate the source of the email using email headers. During this demonstration, Mr. Timothy Marobane advised the CEO that the email header only shows the translated IP address. As such, the original IP address cannot be found. So what I mean by a translated IP address is that in IT, there's a mechanism called network address translation, which is used to hide the source internal IP address with an IP address that is routable on the internet. So, however, using the information provided by the email header, Mr. Timothy Marobana showed the CEO the location where the email was sent. The location could be identified.
Mr. Commissioner, if I may intervene, it looks like the sentence is complete. Can I just ask the witness whether he meant that Mr. Timothy Marobana showed the CEO the location where the email was sent from instead of where the email was sent?
Thank you for the correction. So the location could be identified as Interface Holdings, located at number 25 West Street, Gauteng, Johannesburg. So Interface Holdings, also known as iFace, is an integrated online media company that houses digital brands, including webmail. In essence, webmail and Interface Holdings are the same company, and this is consistent with the information that I provided to Ms. Vyogazi Benye in the email containing a summary of my findings, which I've attached as Annex F, where I mentioned that webmail is one of the institutions that should be served with Section 205 subpoena, the other institution being Online SAS, which is located in France. I then advised everyone who was present in that meeting that to get the source IP address as well as the sender details, a Section 205 subpoena is required. However, this will require a case to be opened with the SAPS. The CEO then gave me a mandate to open the case in order to pursue the Section 205 route. This mandate was given in front of everyone who was present during that meeting. After receiving the mandate...
Sorry, can I just ask for my interest? Section 205 of what act? Of which act is Section 205?
I'm not sure of which act, Mr. Commissioner.
Is it the Criminal Procedure Act, or is it some other IT Act or something?
It's not an IT Act.
Commissioner, is the Criminal Procedure Act, it deals with subpoenas.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, after receiving the mandate, I contacted Brigadier Pete Peterse, who referred me to Colonel Yolanda Gay. So I've put a footnote to say that Brigadier Pete Peterse was contacted directly when an inquiry was open. So I already had contacts of Brigadier Pete Peterse because it is a best practice requirement as specified in ISO 27001 for the IT security function to maintain a list of contact with authorities to address issues of cybercrime and other IT security related matters. Colonel Yolanda Gay assisted me with opening of an inquiry, and he gave it an inquiry number CCI 6/09/2017 on the 29th September 2017. Colonel Yolanda Gay then sent an SMS at 4:22 p.m. on the same day, confirming that an inquiry has indeed been opened and that the inquiry has been assigned to Lieutenant Colonel Steinberg. The statement had the following details. Hi, Simpiwe. I will send you a mail with all the detail. Colonel Steinberg will attend to your matter on Monday. Your inquiry is 6/09/2017. It is also very crucial that you open a case at the police station so that your case can be investigated by the right unit. Our office will attend to the cyber element in the meantime. Regards, Colonel Gay.
If I may intervene, Commissioner, did you understand Colonel Gay, what case, the case that she said you should open, what case was she referring to?
Yes, she was referring to a case that will tie in with the inquiry that had already been opened to pursue this Section 205 route. So on the 29th September 2017, immediately after opening the inquiry, I sent a text message to Ms. Vuyokazi Menye with the following details. Update from SAPS. Inquiry has been logged with SAPS Cybercrime Unit, and the inquiry, I provided her with an inquiry number, and also mentioned that a docket will need to be opened on Monday. And I also mentioned that this was from Colonel Steinbeck. And then on Monday, the 1st of October 2017, I went to Garsfontein Police Station, but I failed to open the case because the PIC offices fell outside of Garsfontein Police Station's jurisdiction. So the police officers at Garsfontein advised me to go to the Brooklyn Police Station instead. So on the next day, on the 2nd of October 2017, I opened the case at the Brooklyn Police Station and recorded the statement that I've attached as Annexure H. As mentioned on this first statement, this case was opened for the purpose of obtaining a Section 205 subpoena. It should be placed on record that the case was registered as a corruption case by the SAPS and not by me. They recorded the case based on the allegations made on the content of the email. So when the police officer was registering the case, he did not know which charge to assign to the case. And then I asked him to speak to Lieutenant Steinbeck, who had previously opened an inquiry over the phone. So Lieutenant Steinbeck advised the police officer was registering the case over the phone to assign it a charge of corruption because of the content of the email was about corruption. At the time, the charge of corruption was assigned to the case to achieve the objective of getting a Section 205 subpoena in the quest to investigate the sender. At this moment, I was slowly acting on the instructions of the CEO, and it did not occur to me that investigating a sender may be unlawful within the provisions of the Protected Disclosure Act. Furthermore, at this moment, I had not enlisted my cooperation with the members of the SAPS into a substantive corruption investigation into the contents of the James emails. My sole objective was to obtain a Section 205 subpoena in the quest to identify the sender. While I became aware of the corruption charge on the 2nd October 2017, my understanding at that point in time was that this would be a corruption case to investigate the sender as per the mandate that I was given to by the CEO, and not a corruption case targeting the CEO. This understanding was informed by the fact that whistleblowing, James Nogu here being a potential whistleblower, and corruption, they often go hand in hand. As such, I did not feel the need to communicate to the CEO, nor to Ms. Vuyokazi Menye that there was a charge of corruption because the CEO was not the target at the time. So at 11:13 a.m. on the same day that the case was opened, that is on the 2nd of October 2017, I received the following text message from the SAPS confirming the case number. Then the message from the SAPS says the case registered on 2017-1002 at Brooklyn with reference 19/10/2017, and they gave me the station contact details. It should be noted that the above text did not specify the charge of corruption also. I then forwarded the text message to Ms. Vuyokazi Menye, who in turn forwarded the same text message to the CEO at 11:37 a.m., informing him about the case that has been opened, and then the CEO then acknowledged receipt of the text message by replying, "Thanks, CC." Thank you. Okay.
I just wanted to check, when the corruption case was open, and I think the Kasim judgment has traversed the area, didn't you feel that you should speak to the CEO so that he could get a lawyer or start preparing himself for these issues?
Not at
Didn't
all.
you really feel obligated to talk to him?
Not at all, because at that point in time, the CEO was not the target. So we opened the case to pursue the Section 205 subpoena to investigate the sender. So I had no reason to inform the CEO because he was not the target.
In a follow-up question, did you, during the period from, say, 13th of September to the 2nd of October, roughly, the rest of that month, did you have any meetings or discussions with either Ms. Menye or the CEO about the case?
Not at all.
So there was no formal interaction, face-to-face interaction to say what is happening or you to give a report to them, to either of them?
So between the 2nd and
The 13th of September when it was asked, and the 2nd of October when you dealt with this matter,
So,
when you became aware of the corruption charge.
okay, remember the case was opened on the 2nd, and then there was time between the 2nd and the 13th when I enlisted my cooperation with the police. So there were certain events that occurred during that time, which I'm going to touch into.
No, I'm going back before that, because I'm saying on the 13th of September when you started, when you were asked to look into the matter,
Okay,
which was the 13th of September.
yes,
I'm really just asking whether, was at that time, it was still trying to get this 205 subpoena,
yes.
whether between that time and opening the case on the 2nd of October, there'd
Yes.
been any interaction face-to-face with either Ms. Menye or with the CEO to ask her what is happening or where does the case
Not at
stand?
all. Okay, so going to another section, talking about circumstances leading to my cooperation with the police. So on Friday, the 6th of October, as we were attending the board strategic planning session at Magaliesberg, I received a call from a gentleman called Colonel Nama who requested a meeting with me at the offices of the Provincial Commissioner regarding the case that I opened at Brooklyn Police Station on the 2nd October 2017. Colonel Nama requested the meeting to be held on the 13th October at the office of the Provincial Commissioner located at number 16 Empire Road, Parktown, Johannesburg. After receiving the call from Colonel Nama, I informed Ms. Vuyokazi Menye about the call, and I also indicated to her that I was concerned about this call from the SAPS provincial offices because the case to investigate the sender of James Nogu emails was registered at Brooklyn Police Station. As such, I did not understand why this call came from the SAPS provincial offices in Parktown. Ms. Vuyokazi Menye then asked me to inform the CEO verbally about the details of the call from Colonel Nama and to also put my concerns in writing. I approached the CEO during a coffee break to inform him about the call, and I also put my concerns in writing in an email with subject update on the James Nogu email. I've attached that email as Annexure I. On the same day, I received a call from Colonel Nama. On the same day that I received the call from Colonel Nama, I also received a call from Lieutenant Steinberg, who wanted to give me an update on their investigation. Lieutenant Steinberg advised me that since the internet service provider, which I refer to as Online SaaS, that is hosting the mail server that relayed the email from James Nogu, is situated in France, she advised that a mutual legal assistance treaty will be required between France and our National Prosecuting Authority. And she mentioned that though this is a cumbersome process, Online SaaS can be subpoenaed to release all the information relating to the sender of the email. However, she mentioned that this process can only be executed if there is a possible suspicion of transgression. And then she further mentioned that unfortunately in our case, there is no possible suspicion that James Nogu committed any offense. So the contents of my dialogue with Lieutenant Steinberg were captured on the same email that I sent to Vuyokazi with the subject update on James Nogu emails, which I've attached as Annexure I.
Sorry, can I just ask you, in all of this activity, did you or Ms. Menye at any time consult with the legal team from the PIC about procedures, process, and what could or should be done?
Not at this point. So in his forensic report...
Just a further question. Why did the police say that James Nogu didn't commit an offense?
Okay,
Is there some reason they gave? Yeah.
Their rationale was that they don't see any offense with anyone blowing a whistle. In his forensic report and during the PIC Commission of Inquiry, Mr. Franz Likubo testified that I misled the PIC by mentioning that the internet service provider is located in France and that a mutual legal assist treaty is required. I cannot understand how I misled the PIC when all I did was to relay verbatimly the feedback I received from Lieutenant Steinberg about the police investigation. The meeting with Colonel Nama, provincial head of, the provincial head of Commissioner Brigadier Modise, as well as Ms. Vuyokazi Menye and myself, was held at the Police of the Provincial Commissioner on Friday, the 13th October 2017 as scheduled. Brigadier Modise and Colonel Nama mentioned that they were under the impression that the person who opened the case on the 2nd of October was also the same person who made allegations of corruption on the email. So in essence, the police thought that was James Nogu. So they wanted to make sure that I am protected as a whistleblower under the Protected Disclosure Act. They then explained that, I then explained to them that no, I am not James Nogu, and that I was instructed by the CEO to register a case in an effort to investigate the sender. I also advised the police that the mandate from the CEO was clear, and it was that of registering a case to investigate the sender of James Nogu emails. At this juncture, Ms. Vuyokazi Menye excused herself from the meeting to get something to eat. Brigadier Modise also mentioned that the meeting was between the person who opened the case and the members of the SAPS. Acting on the advice given by Brigadier Modise, I wrote a further statement which I've attached as Annexure J to clarify this misunderstanding that Colonel Namba and Brigadier Modise had at the time. The clarity provided by the further statement is that the case was originally opened to assist in finding the sender as per the instructions given to me by the CEO on the 28th September 2017. The further statement cleared the misunderstanding that the case was originally opened to lay a corruption charge against the CEO, a fact that Dr. Advocate Nazir Kasim seemed to not accept in his disciplinary hearing judgment. To further clear my understanding, Colonel Namba compiled a letter on an SAPS letterhead. I've also attached that letter as Annexure K. This letter sets out precisely how the case ended up being registered as a corruption case. The contents of this letter were unfortunately completely ignored by Advocate Nazir Kasim when he was making a ruling during my disciplinary hearing. In this letter, which is dated 16 September 2017, Colonel Nama clearly stated that the case could not be closed immediately, as well as doing so would be contrary to the provisions of the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act, which is PRICA. During the meeting, Colonel Nama and Brigadier Modise mentioned that the SAPS would investigate allegations that constituted the contents of the email instead of investigating the identity of the sender. They made an example to me with an anonymous phone call tip-off made to the police about a house that manufactures drugs. They explained that upon receiving such an anonymous tip-off, the police would immediately rush to the house that is alleged to manufacture drugs, and they will not instead investigate who made that anonymous tip-off call. So they further explained that the identity of the person who sent these whistleblowing emails, in this case James Nogu, will not be disclosed neither to myself nor to the PIC, because doing so would only encourage ordinary citizens from interacting anonymously with law enforcement agencies in the fight against crime. Okay, thank you. I'm going to read that again. They further explained that the identity of the person who sent whistleblowing emails to the PIC, that is James Nogu, will not be disclosed neither to myself nor to the PIC, because doing so would only discourage ordinary citizens from interacting anonymously with law enforcement agencies in the fight against crime. At this point, I pledge my commitment to assist the SAPS in providing them with information to investigate the allegations made by James Nogu, who is in this case the whistleblower. Brigadier Modise mentioned that it would benefit the investigation if they have someone internally within PIC who can assist with supporting evidence.
Question?
Correct. Go ahead.
Yeah, question. I just want to check. You were a messenger sent by the PIC, and as you said, you were not James Nogu. So I don't understand why the police would want you to cooperate as a messenger. Why couldn't they go to the PIC and say they would like to get people to cooperate? Can you explain that, please?
Okay, I will touch on that further, the statement that talks to that. Okay. So I made this decision partially because I could not envisage effectively thwarting an investigation into serious allegations that SAPS apparently took seriously. It was also partially because the contents of the James Nogu email had themselves started to weigh upon me. While I was not in a position to pass judgment on their complete truthfulness, the allegations were so detailed and categorical. By that I mean they could really be refuted if untrue. I believe that they could not be dismissed as mere scandalizing. I was struck by the fact that the PIC's approach up until this time was primarily to identify and sanction the sender and not transparently justify the processes by which impugnated investment decisions were made. To put it colloquially, I myself began to smell a rat and question whether the instructions given to me to identify James Nogu were proper or designed as part of a cover-up. As a person newly appointed to the PIC, this was a rather bewildering and daunting situation. After reflecting and trying to balance my competing obligations, one to my employer, which is PIC, and the other to an organ of state charged with investigating crime, which is SAPS, I enlisted my cooperation with the SAPS corruption investigation. This was on the basis that I may, during the course of my employment and given the nature of my role, have access to confidential information that may assist with police with their investigation in the fight against corruption. So, Mr. Lidiga, so the request from police was based on my position that I may, during the course of my employment, come into contact, given the role, the nature of my role, come into contact with confidential information that may assist them during the investigation.
And during that time, no one at the PIC knew about this, the legal department at the PIC knew about these things?
At that time, the meeting was between myself and the police, and no one knew about this meeting, yes. So from this day onwards, I accessed confidential documents which I believed could assist the police with their investigation. None of the confidential documents that were retrieved from PIC were used for my own personal gain. It should be noted that from the 18th October 2017 going forward, I also refrained from disclosing information about the case to my manager, Ms. Vurazimenya. However, I did share a further statement with Ms. Vurazimenya when she requested it on Monday, the 16th October 2017. The reason for this is that she was present at the office of the Provincial Commissioner when the further statement was written. Ms. Menya returned to the meeting after buying food while we were finalizing the further statement mentioned above.
Sorry, can I take you to your clause 20, paragraph 20?
Yes.
And ask you if you referred back to your clause on paragraph 4.
Yes.
Which says, I have 17 years of experience in the area of information security, risk, and governance. Would you not regard this as contradictory to your actions? If you are dealing with governance and you are an experienced person in dealing with risk and governance, would you have not seen this as a conflictual response that you actually are providing secretly in confidential documentation to the police to help with their investigations? There's a contradiction to governance and ethics and things with that position. Could you just elaborate how you justified that? Apart from the question of saying you assist the police with their inquiry, but you're dealing with confidential documents that you have in the employ of the PIC undertaken, and you're supposed to be the one protecting the access to information. Okay,
so in my knowledge, based on my 17 years of experience, contractual obligation do not supersede this kind of engagement with the organ of state that is charged with investigating crime.
Does it not, with investigating crime, yes, but there's a difference between that. You're looking up, to me the question I'm asking you is, do you have different recourse? You can go to the chair as the deputy minister, you can go to the minister as the shareholder representative. There are a range of choices you've got about a concern. A confidential whistleblowing, why would you choose to clandestinely use your position of trust to support an investigation that you think may well have been a valid investigation? I'm not questioning that. Mm-hmm. I'm asking whether that was the only route open to you and why you chose that.
Okay, the answer is this was the only route open to me, and I do provide justification thereof further within my statements.
To hear your justification now.
Okay, I had no route to report this to the CEO. because that would mean that I would impede the hands of justice, because I would literally informing the CEO that is being investigated. That's more like impeding the hands of justice. And secondly, I had every reason to believe that the CEO was also conflicted in this, so I did not inform the board about this matter. I've stated a number of reasons why I did not inform the board. So I'm happy to read those reasons further down.
But the board and the chair are two different things. But when you elaborate, please just elaborate why you saw the role of the chair as distinct from the board as not a source.
So the role of the chair, I did not distinct it from the role of the board, so I regard them collectively as the board. Where was I? 22. So all the confidential documents that I accessed during my course of work, some of which were found by Naledi Advisory Services during their forensic investigation, were shared with the relevant members of the SAPS within what I understand to be the provisions of Protected Disclosure Act and or my obligation to assist the police in a criminal investigation. The decision to enlist my cooperation with the members of the SAPS was made in line with Clause 19.5 of the PIC Fraud, Corruption and Nepotism Prevention Policy, where it states under Clause 19.5.1 that an employee can be protected under the Whistleblowers Act if they make wider disclosures to the police.
Mr. Commissioner, yes, it is past 1. I was wondering whether it is a convenient time to take the lunch break.
Until when, Mr. Manahela?
Until 1:45, Commissioner.
That's fine, we'll adjourn then until 1:45.